Welcome to Signs and Wonders, author Melvin Jules Bukiet in conversation with artist David Stern in our series Flight or Fight, Stories of Artists Under Repression. I'm Rachel Stern, Executive Director of the Fritz Ascher Society for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned Art based in New York. Today, I'm honored to introduce the award-winning author Melvin Jules Bukiet, who has published 11 books, including After, Signs and Wonders, and Strange Fire. His fiction has appeared in the Paris Review and other magazines, his nonfiction in the American Scholar and other magazines. He teaches at Sarah Lawrence College and lives in New York City. Melvin Bukiet will be in conversation with artist David Stern, who is a German-born American figurative painter whose work is rooted in the European figurative tradition and informed by American Abstract Expressionism. Stern's art explores the human condition. With a career spanning over 45 years, his works have been exhibited internationally and can be found in public and private collections across the United States, Europe, and Asia. After the presentation, there will be time for Q&A, so please post your questions. Welcome, Melvin Bukiet and David Stern. I now hand over the conversation to David Stern.
Thank you very much, Rachel. For me, this is a complete first. First of all, I am speaking to an author whose books I have read, but who I did not know personally until last week or 2 weeks ago. And it has been, I have reread some of his books before this conversation. And I would love to talk about mostly about After, but since this is called Signs and Wonders, so I think we also delve into Signs and Wonders and other books. And I believe that, or I know that Melvin has brought some text, which he will read a little excerpt of it so that you can actually have a taste of how his writing comes across the page. And so please, Melvin, give us a little bit of a taste of your writing.
Hello. Thank you, David. Thank you, Rachel. Particular thanks to the Fritz Ascher Center for Persecuted, Ostracized, and Banned books. I must say that I've always aspired to have my books banned and never been that fortunate. Perhaps you'll be able to give me a tip on how to join that very special club. Okay. Before we have a conversation, David asked if I'd read a little bit. It's difficult to read just a few pages from a narrative because it will hardly be commenced. It certainly won't be concluded. And so I decided to do something radical, which is to read from a work in progress rather than from one of the published books that David wants to speak to me about. This piece has been written, revised, but will be revised several further times before I deem it done. It takes place about 2/3 into the way of a novel in progress that begins based on the true story of a man I cared very deeply for, whose parents did not intend to leave him as a 6-year-old child in 1938 Vienna, but through an accident of history did. So he was effectively a young Jewish orphan just after the Anschluss. As I say, the first chapter is based, that is actual, but then it is entirely imaginative. And the nameless boy wanders around Vienna seeking habitation, nutrition, comfort of some sort. At one point, when he has been felt danger where he has been, he actually goes to the zoo which is a place that he remembers with great fondness from his childhood. Here he is in the zoo. All of a sudden, the air was thick with a smell hard to identify. Smoke? No, that came to mind because it was common these days. Abandoned buildings, residential or commercial, caught fire, though people said that the former residents set the fires so that no one else could use their property. And when two homeless men burnt to death in the empty Gatzmeyer Theater, a furious public burnt the Gatzmeyer mansion, and the great theatrical family had to seek refuge in the communal home. A joke spread faster than the fire. The home is for communists. If you're a capitalist, maybe they'll take you in at the Capitol. Here in the zoo, however, there were neither communists nor capitalists. There were only animals, and no one else on this pre-torrential, it's about to pour, afternoon to appreciate them. You could have ducked. It is done in the second person. I've never written in the second person, but it seemed right. You could have ducked into the birdhouses, but the birds would probably sense the storm and chatter and fly about madly, crashing into the mesh cages that enclosed them. Silly birds, they were safe, but their primitive instincts took over. That smell, it wasn't smoke, and even if some building was smoldering, the downpour would extinguish it. This smell was less chemical, more organic, a mix of meat and shit and something else you couldn't identify. The zoo designers were enlightened men. They did not think it wise or proper to house a wild animal like a human prisoner in a jail. Instead of a cinder lockbox, they created a naturalistic environment that would remind the animals of their original home. Maybe that would ease the heartache they must have felt in the alien city. Left and right of the path were, quote, wild places excavated meters below the path. Each was a man-made mini mountain with a cave where the residents could find a trace of warmth or privacy. None of the creatures were now visible. Most likely they detected the storm too, like the birds. But these were larger than any bird and could easily withstand buffeting. The worst that would happen to them was they'd get wet. That was the smell that underlay the other smells of meat and evacuation. It was wet fur. Their pelts had already absorbed the pre-storm moisture, and their odor then permeated the air along with their food and shit. To the left were bears, to the right gorillas. Bears you thought were not as smart as gorillas, therefore more dangerous. Miles Brandish, who's the Wild West hero of a series that the protagonist likes to read or have read to him, was always wary when bears were nearby. Then again, few gorillas lived in the American West, so Miles didn't have much experience with gorillas. Bearing that in mind, you felt the first drops of what looked to develop into a biblical downpour and made a decision. To make it impossible for you to go back on your decision, you hoisted the fully laden suitcase that you carried halfway across Vienna over the fence and dropped it into the enclosure. None of the occupants seemed to have heard, so you climbed over the fence and lowered yourself along the rocky wall until you finally reached the level of the suitcase. In those few minutes, the storm had already picked up, and rivulets of rain, or maybe they were sweat, dripped off your forehead. There was nothing else to do now but enter the cave. The smell that suffused the air outside the cave was overpowering inside the cave, a curtain of monkey funk that made it nearly impossible to breathe. You choked but advanced, holding your suitcase like a young Englishman on vacation off for a grand tour of the continent. And just as the swarthy Italian natives might stare at your pale countenance, so two gorillas sitting companionably side by side against the rear wall took in their unexpected visitor with idle curiosity. Hello, you said. I don't know if you remember me. I was here once before. This might have embarrassed Mr. Gorilla. Okay, I'm going to read exactly. I'm trying to edit as I'm reading. There was a scene in which a gorilla threw a pile of shit at the tourists. You should also know that in that suitcase are some pastries that he stole. You didn't mention the incident of the thrown shit because it might have embarrassed Mr. Gorilla in front of Mrs. Gorilla, if that was his wife, or maybe they were really good friends. That made you worry that you might be seen as an intruder. It was vital to make a good impression. Fortunately, you had just the thing. I know that I may not be welcome here, but you opened the suitcase and brought out a rock-hard pastry. Why you'd packed it at the last minute, you couldn't have said until now. No matter. Mrs. Gorilla's large nostrils began twitching, and Mr. Gorilla caught on swiftly. Neither of them moved, but their eyes shone in the dark, and he licked his lips. You stepped carefully forward and snapped the rigid pastry in half. You'd only brought one, and set the halves as close to the couple as you dared. Maybe breaking the pastry released some of its own aromas, because the disgusting air took on a scintilla of egg and sugar and cream and chocolate. It was an eclair. Mr. Gorilla allowed Mrs. Gorilla her choice. She in turn daintily picked up the smaller of the two halves and pushed it into her mouth with a cream-covered digit. He opened wide and used his pale palm. Then both of them looked back at you and smiled, teeth the size of walnuts. Lolling tongues unfurled like bubbly pink athletic socks, twitching nostrils and a gleam in their eyes. The gorillas welcomed you into their humble abode. You sat down and heard the crack of lightning. Okay, that just is the entry point to one of the adventures that the narrator has in this place at that time.
Yeah, and it represents very well your style of writing, and it has all these elements which are in all the books I read from you, and there's a mix between reality and fiction, and the fiction turns into, while you're reading on, it turns into reality, and you're getting more and more the feeling you have been there. So, and I think that's very unique to you, I think, to your writing. And then, of course, it also takes like so many unexpected turns where you could not imagine that happening. So, so this kind of, but it's always also connected to, at least the books I read, they are connected to an overarching theme of the show. There's always, like, you have the feeling there's something underlying which is somehow informing the protagonists or the figures in your writing. So can you talk a little bit about the process? I mean, like, for example,
Reality and the imagination.
Again?
Reality and the imagination. You seem to think that I have a choice. You seem to think that any of us has a choice. Yes, things happen in my books that may not be based in what most people expect. I'm not a zoologist. I have no idea what the response of two gorillas to a young boy entering into their domain would be. But when you talk about things happening that one can't imagine, those things happen frequently in history also. I think much of this century consists of things that couldn't have been imagined, certainly not by the people those terrible things happened to. And it seems as if we are striding forward into acts of even greater heinous imagination. So that is a line that that line between reality and imagination is not one that I recognize or that I'm capable of drawing. I know that it was said, I think, by the art historian Meyer Shapiro, that there are two kinds of artists. One is represented by the mirror, one by the lamp. The mirror aims to, the person with the mirror aims to hold it up and reflect reality as accurately as possible. The lamp illuminates it. I'm clearly more of a lamp guy than a mirror guy.
I would even question whether the mirror guy would actually produce art. I mean, the holding, I mean, there is this, in painting, there's a realistic position where people seem to believe that they are, like by recording or by reporting on reality, that they are creating something, which I think is not the case. So, but talking about process, I mean, I understand you. I mean, this is almost like superfluous now to ask that whether you are you're not. I would assume you're not writing out a script, like you do not write out some kind of plan and then follow that plan by writing out the pieces inside. So it's more like an overall organic approach, I guess, where you start writing at a certain point and then you look where this takes you. Is that correct?
Yes, it's absolutely correct. I'm thinking of a scene early on in Philip Roth's short novel, The Ghostwriter, which is quasi-autobiographical, in which the young writer, Zuckerman, meets the elderly writer, Lonoff, and they're speaking about what you call process. And Lonoff says something like, "What do I do? I write a sentence and then I turn it around. And then I
Yeah.
write another sentence and I turn that one around. And then I take a walk and I turn them both around. And if I don't do this for so much as a day, I'm driven crazy with a sense of waste and regret." That's sort of what I do. I wake up and I write sentences and I turn them around. Why? To what purpose? Why? I'm not sure. Because it's what I do. To what purpose? That's also mysterious to me. I don't do very much self-analyzing. I might have to say preferably it's to hurt people, to damage them deeply. If I've if I have rendered what the world seems like to me, which probably gets back to a reality in the imagination. What I do is not photographic, is not replication, but it seems to it's what the world seems like to me. It's what emotional effect it has, perhaps even being grandiose, what kind of philosophical effect it has. It's the attainment of a truer reality beneath the sort of crude, mundane reality.
There's an element of self-exploration there too, right? So you are starting to, and you are figuring things out while you write about yourself, and you're clarifying some positions about yourself and your position to reality as well.
But if I ever do that, then I'll stop writing. And I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, but I haven't come close to any self-knowledge. And even if I am seeking some of it through fiction, I'm not aware of it. And I don't say that to myself. I'm only seeking that the thing that I'm writing be true to itself. And if you do it long enough, you know it when you arrive at it.
Have you noticed any changes in your personality while you're writing? I mean,
I started
are
off
you
very
different
mean.
today than you were like 20 years ago or 30
Yeah,
years
I
ago?
started off as a very mean person, and I've gotten meaner with age.
Okay. Very well.
I
But
don't believe in taking prisoners. Um, my
okay.
sense of history is that prisoners were never taken. And I mean, it's odd. My life is different from I do not do as I say. Um, I'm actually rather cheerful. I like to think I'm rather kind. I give money to people asking for money on the sidewalk. I can be affectionate.
Yeah.
But those are all of those attitudes are despite the Hobbesian viewpoint that I suppose I maintain.
Yeah. When you seem to have a vast knowledge of the subjects you're writing about. So are you doing research for your books? I mean, when
No.
you start writing, or you are like you just have this experience. I have one particular question I would like to ask you.
Okay.
And that is in terms of, in as well as in after your first, like kind of, it's not the first novel, but it was your first really, you arrived with after a book about the aftermath of the Holocaust. A ragtag band of survivors are getting together and they're scheming and they do not hold any prisoners, and they are and then there's a crescendo where they are liberate what was it, 15 tons of gold, of teeth gold from the camps. And then I don't want to give the plot away. People should read this book, definitely. So in this book, you are so, I mean, you imagine, I mean, I grew up in Germany, and although way later, I mean, I was born in 56, but I do remember as a little child, I saw still, ruins from the war. So there were still leftovers, and it's like, I don't know, it's I haven't, I see that you have a tremendous capability or knowledge about what that was like. So it's almost like I would say, I mean, it's complete fiction, I know, but it's so real that, and without even, you don't describe the Shoah, you don't describe, just talk about the results, the people who come out there who barely survived and then become different people, or art, or whatever. They are dealing with the aftermath. So how do you, and that's the same also for Science and Wonders, where as a German born person, I'm amazed how deeply how deep your knowledge about the German, I would say that there's a human condition, there's a German condition, about the German psyche, the German history, and the pitfalls of it all. So
Yeah.
where does that come from?
Well, you're asking a bit of a psychological question,
Yes.
a bit of a practical question. It's inevitable. My family does come out of this history. My father had the misfortune of being born in a shtetl outside of Krakow. Almost everyone he knew was murdered. And he carried it with him. I grew up. My wife actually was born in New York City, grew up first couple of years in Queens, although my wife says that I basically grew up in a shtetl because everyone I knew had come out of that history and brought it with them. So a certain knowledge was mother's milk to me. Not a deep historical knowledge, not even a particular sensory knowledge, but more of an emotional knowledge of how the people who lived through catastrophe continue to live and what they brought with them. So I have done no research besides growing up in the home that I grew up in. You also alluded to the fact that although I clearly can't keep very far from the Holocaust, I never portray the thing itself. either directly or as filtered through the imagination. After begins the day after the Holocaust. One of my earlier books, Stories of an Imaginary Childhood, takes place prior to the Holocaust. The Signs and Wonders sort of vaguely revisits the Holocaust at the turn of the current century. I'd sort of say that there's a bit of maybe humility, which is not my foremost characteristic, before the enormity of history, and that those specific years I would prefer to leave to the world of nonfiction, to the world of testimonies, train schedules, things like that. On the other hand, my logic is really dubious. I know that. If I somehow don't write about the 6 years from 1939 to 1945, all I've done is drawn a chronological fence around the material. Could one write hypothetically about New York in 1943? Obviously, the answer is yes. Maybe could we cross the ocean and write about, do you draw the line at the shtetl but not the ghetto but not the camp but not the chamber? In The Last of the Just, French writer André Schwartzbart goes into the chamber and does it with utter necessity. Maybe all I'm saying is not that one shouldn't write about that, but that I shouldn't write about it. And yet I do keep picking at the corners because it seems impossible to keep away from. I have written about other things. I've written about the mania of contemporary artists. I've written some vaguely domestic and American academic fictions. But I return because this is what the world seems like to me. And perhaps even the core of your question about how true it is to Germany, I've heard that before from other people, among others from my German publishers. How did you know? How did you know? It was just like that. I'm not sure what the answer is. I mean, the pleasant vain answer is that it is a testament to the power of my imagination. But maybe the real answer is that Jews could try to get away from it, could even pretend to get away from it. Germans couldn't. Jews had to live with the Holocaust for 6 years. Germans have been living with the Holocaust for the 60 years afterwards. And the craziness of the narratives where things happen, maybe that automatically reflects the way Germans have to perceive of the world.
I think that's, yeah. I think also there's this, let me just get this out of the way. There's obviously generational trauma, which is like, meanwhile, we know that it's like even genetically transported into the next generation. And so how is it necessary to have been affected, I mean, directly affected by the Shoah, by the Holocaust, in order to write about it? What do you think? In terms of authenticity?
I have complicated thoughts about that. First off, I'm not a big fan of trauma. I definitely belong to the slap them around and say get over it theory of
Which doesn't mean that there is no trauma. I mean,
yeah.
obviously, I
eh,
mean, if you slap it around,
um,
it's still
I would
some.
just again the people I knew were too busy. I mean, the past was always with them,
Yeah.
um, which they tended to refer to as the war. Um, but for the most part, they were really too busy uh, trying to create new lives than dwell on the previous ones. Um, as for who should write about it, I have changed my mind over time. Frankly, I used to feel possessive. I felt it was a kind of obscene gift that our parents had given us. Uh, Writers often seek subjects of meaning and significance, and we had it for breakfast. Um, all they could write about was dating on the Upper West Side, and we could talk about genocide. Wow. Um, but that was stupid. I've changed my mind. Um, a number of people have written about it who have no genetic connection, um, and they've done it fairly brilliantly. I think uh, the only people who should write about it are those who can write about it. It's a matter of literary ability, more so more so than empathy or sympathy, and certainly more so um, than specific knowledge, than empirical knowledge. I mean, this is going to sound, there are a lot of uh, often of books that survivors have written who are very eager to convey their pasts to their families and to future generations. And they're all true, and very few of them are good.
Yeah.
It is the unfairness of art. It belongs to a different category of being.
That's certainly true. Um, when I spoke about trauma, it's not so much the idea that you are shrinking away and sitting in a corner and feeling to be a victim. It's more like it is informing you. It's like an overarching theme of your life, which is like, and you need to kind of get it into your consciousness. I mean, this is what trauma experts do. They are like try to revise that, bring it to the foreground so that you're finally done with it. If you don't do that, that's of course always like kind of a ground, which might be, for an artist or for a writer might be a very good fuel to produce more art or more.
But why get over it?
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
if you get over it, you lose all sense of history and any significance that human life has. Uh, for years in the Holocaustal community, there was a bit of a mantra when people were attempting to re-enter the world. It was sort of forgive but never forget. Um, Actually, if I could forget, that would be a good thing in my life, but I'm damn well never going to forgive. And when you posit trauma as lying curled up in a fetal ball under a bed, it can equally manifest itself by standing on top of a mountain and beating your chest. Trauma can be or pain can be triumphant. One takes the awareness of the evils of humanity and throws it into humanity's face. And that's its own kind of perverse accomplishment.
Yeah, I also think that, like with this underlying, theme, it really pays tribute to what that really was. This was, I mean, it's like it has its cousins, but it was a singular event, and a singular, yeah, unspeakable event, which informed all of the 20th century and also the rest of, or the beginning of the 21st, and probably the rest of it.
It's an unspeakable event that we can't stop speaking about.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also, uh, I mean, one of the things which always pop into my mind is like it has to do with the civilization. It has to do with the basically the collapse of civilization. What Jung used to describe as a shadow, and suddenly you have a whole people, coming, acting like the shadow of themselves, right?
And maybe civilization has just been a shadow, and the Holocaust was the ray of sunshine that showed the truth about human nature.
Yeah, yeah, that's the way to look at it. Yes, absolutely. Let's go back to the books a little bit more. So, your protagonist in these three books I have reread. There is Isaac Kaufman in After, there's Snake Hammurabi, and then there's Nathan Kazakov. And they are wrestling with God, right? I mean, famously, Snake Hammurabi says in the first sentence of the book is, God is the problem. And then they don't believe in God, obviously, but
Why do
there's
we say people don't believe in God? That is such a weird phrase.
okay.
Um, I don't say that I believe in my teacup, which is not showing
Yeah,
very well on the screen. It isn't a matter of belief.
okay.
Um, and when there's the negative corollary, nobody says they don't believe in unicorns. There are coffee cups. There are not unicorns. God is not a subject for debate. It is an idiotic concept from a primitive age that delivers comfort to the uneasy. That bears no relationship to reality whatsoever. Um, it's not that I don't believe in God. There isn't a God. At least I certainly hope not. Um, because if there is, then God is responsible for everything that happens. And I'd rather leave it up to either randomness or the uh, idiocy and cruelty of human nature um, than to any greater force. That's for sure. Yeah, no, I'm not a fan of religion. I'm deeply Jewish. I'm very happy to be a Jew. I think I'm an intellectual Jew, a cultural Jew, an emotional Jew, a gastronomic Jew. Um, I still can't really eat ham. Uh, but the flavors of lox or pastrami are sacramental to me. Um, but um, but no, religion has probably caused more death, murder, and havoc throughout human history than any other force, with the possible exception of disease. So yeah, I mean, Signs and Wonders in particularly aims to slaughter religion. In that book, Christianity is rather foremost, but Judaism and Islam uh, receive a few whacks also.
They do, they do. And you, of course, have answered this before I could even ask a question. But the thing is that, I mean, there seem to, Snake Hammurabi and Kazakov and Kaufman, there seem to, like, okay, so let's not say wrestle, but they seem to allow for some sort of psychic presence of God. So like a conscience somehow. So which it pops up in their development as characters in the.
You think that their conscience is sort of a burbling forth of a spiritual or deific sense? I don't think I'd agree with that. But then again, I do not believe that writers are privileged readers of their own works. I actually am more likely to accept what other people say about what I write. I just write. I just want to make interesting things happen in the best language I am capable of bringing forth.
Yeah.
It's
Also,
it's an urge to create without any knowledge of what is what is being created. There's no initial 6 days about it.
yeah, but the that's true. Yeah, sure. But the what I find so amazing about this book is that besides the knowledge about the German psyche, is also that there is a certain ambiguity. I mean, the way you write this, Ben Aleph seems to be doing good with the wonders. I mean, and the science also, and you just reveal this, little by little, and so there's something about the story could potentially develop into something completely different.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly for some characters a striving towards meaning, because our lives are easier if we're able to attribute some significance to them. Or if not to our own lives, attribute some significance to the world around us. Some people do that by good acts, by trying to make the world a better place. And I'm in favor of those acts. But let's not forget that it's also an act of willful self-delusion to believe in meaning or significance.
Well, I'm a kind
A
of
very
a
comforting one, a very understandable one, but an intellectually incoherent one.
Okay, I'm kind of a believer in some kind of what I would say is it's a behavior which is applying to your higher self, so to speak. So or you could in a good say like be at your best behavior. So meaning like you
Yeah.
are applying to something which is not just you sitting down here, but it's like kind of you're looking from a bird's
I really don't know for sure that our best behavior doesn't involve eating babies.
eye. It's true too.
We're making these weird judgments based on something or other. Categorical imperative, I suppose, says that. Um, Nature is not like that. Nature doesn't make those judgments. And nowadays we tend, many of us tend to uh, idealize nature, um, see that as, but nature is quite cruel,
Yeah,
unforgiving, does not have these qualities that we think are higher. I prefer those qualities. I'd like to live in a world with them, but I'm not going to exalt them.
right. Even since the days of Rousseau, we should by now know that there is no noble savage, and there is no, and there's
But there are
back
plenty of savage
back
nobles.
Back to nature is not the solution. I have one other question I would love to look into. I mean, I noticed that also in all three books, there are some historical persons, like popping up. Um, there is Hammering Hank in After. There is, I believe, this is der Schreiber is Elie Wiesel, I believe, and Elie Wiesel,
Yeah.
like also makes an appearance in
Yes, I have
Conquest.
conflicted. I have deep and conflicted thoughts about Ellie, whom I knew and who knew me. Uh, what an odd life he led uh, to end up as the human representation of that entire history. Um, if he wasn't insane before, it certainly drove him to insanity, I think. Um, no other no other response would be possible. I tend to think maybe if you actually fully engage with the Holocaust, it drives anyone insane. It should.
Yeah, yeah,
And if it doesn't, there's something wrong with the person.
yeah. So when you write fiction, I mean, yeah, how do these people just show up? I mean, there's also Netanyahu showing up in Strange Fire, and and they are not, I mean, sure, they have different names, but they are clearly identifiable. So, what is behind that? Is that important in order to
Um,
make it more seem, more to make it more palpable, to make it more, like reality itself, or is it
no, I think
just have a bone to pick?
writers are thieves. You take what you can to build what you want, and some of it is self-created. But if there happens to be something out there on the shelf, as it were, um, or maybe a very Jewish analogy, schmata business. Some is custom and some is on the rack, off the rack. Um, if it's easier shorthand to pluck a Netanyahu off the rack in order to use him in a novel with some of my own custom-made characters, why not? There's
That's a
no
great
shame, no boundary.
That's a great explanation. So I have like lots of other questions, but I think we should maybe leave it, give it back to Rachel, um, because, well, yeah, I think this goes too deep into the books. I can only tell everybody, please get a copy of After, get a copy of Strange Fire, and also get a copy of Science and Wonders. You need to read these books. They are sensational, and um, they're paradigm changing, actually, I would say.
Thank you.
All right.
And of course, once you read three of them, you're gonna, if you're only a little bit like me, you're gonna want to read them all. So that's absolutely so. I invite everyone now to please post your questions. Federica already said, what a relief, an American who openly speaks of the non-existence of God. Bravo, bravo. That's not a question, just a comment to the uh, to the God question that we.
Well, I could answer it anyway. And say, what is there about America? I mean, yes, an astonishing number of my co-nationalists seem to think that there's a God. More so, I believe the figures are more so in America than most other nations. What does that mean? Um, I'm not sure, but I don't think it's good.
We'll find out, I guess. Yeah. So are there any questions coming? I think your conversation was so
Shut
very,
everybody up.
no, also very full, and there's a lot to think about. And yeah, so maybe both of you want to say one more thing, and then we'll just conclude the way it is.
You first, David.
Okay, David first, like concluding.
Yeah, like just mention this again. I mean, I might not completely agree with the God question, but I do definitely agree with the childish belief of a God who's answering your personal questions and who's like kind of acting on your behalf. That's for sure. But there might be more than like as I said, it's maybe more a psychic question than now a psychological question than and a question of theology. So, but what I would like to point out again is that what I find so very, very important of in Melvin's work is that is the dimension of the Holocaust, to dimension as a incredible event, as a change of the paradigm, the complete change of the paradigm, and that like all the stupid talk about never again and all that doesn't come close to really become conscious about what that really did and what really happened and how that influenced or how that is still influencing our lives day in day out and how much it uh, um, added to the potentiality of each of us to be a murderer and there is I think that is a very important part of your work. And I think this is like you need to be applauded for that. And that is, yeah, that's what I'm saying. The human condition has not changed, but it has certainly been, put into a different type of focus.
Thanks. I don't know exactly how I can consolidate either what we've been speaking about or myself. So I think maybe I will end by taking this conversation to a particular low point in the contemporary world. About a half a dozen years ago, I think a friend of mine won a book award, and I was asked to speak about the book and introduce her at the ceremony. It was held in an office building in Lower Manhattan that had a name in 5 large letters across over the door. And even though I was speaking to a mixed audience, as it were, and even though I was supposed to be talking about the book, and I did, I spoke about the book and I spoke about the author, and then I couldn't resist one final line about the name that was emblazoned all over the facade of the building. And I sort of vowed that no matter what I spoke about since then, whether it was books or chocolate or the Mets' chances in 2025, I would always repeat that sentence. Our president is an intolerable monster.
All right.
Does that tie in with Federica's question? She says, I'm a huge admirer of your work. I'm in the process of writing a book about the uselessness of teaching the Holocaust the way it is taught, especially in the US. And she asked whether she may ask a political question, and I leave it up to you, Melvin, whether you want to.
Maybe I already answered it, but sure.
Can you comment on the issue of American Jewish support for an utterly fascist mentality and how this connects to the problem of the corny discourses of the Shoah that influenced generations of American Jewish thinking?
I think all discourse about the last election is framed wrongly. I don't think Kamala Harris did not lose because she was a woman. She did not lose because she was Black. She did not lose because celebrity endorsements went awry. She did not lose because she couldn't connect to working people. It wasn't that she lost. It was that he won because people wanted it. He didn't lose because he's a criminal. He didn't lose because he's an ignoramus. He didn't lose because he's heedless of other human beings. He won. And he won because of every trait that is vile and reprehensible in him, because that's what echoes in the American soul. He is cruel and stupid, and we voted for him because we are cruel and stupid. The people who voted for him are not surprised by him. They're delighted because it has opened the doors to depths that maybe were repressed for generations. There are plenty of analogies, whether it's Pandora's box, whether it's zoos with the gates thrown wide open. There is an irrepressible desire for evil and insanity. I think it's sort of how we're built. I don't think there's any, and it does, I connected to the European events of mid-20th century, and in different way, it plays itself out in different ways in different times, but it's always true.
I think that's a perfect way to end this event. Thank you so much, Melvin Bukiet. Thank you so much, David Stern. Be very well, and we are all taking a lot with us to think about. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks.